This is the Washington Week Webcast Extra.
I'm John Harwood, sitting in for Gwen Ifill this week. I'm joined around the table by Michael Crowley of Politico, Joan Biskupic of Reuters, Reid Wilson of Morning Consult, and Gearan of The Washington Post. We talked in the broadcast about Hillary Clinton's strategy going into the first Democratic debate next week. But there's another consideration we touched on, the specter of Vice President Joe Biden jumping into the race. There are reports that Clinton allies are actively digging up whatever they can should Biden decide to jump in.
Now, if he gets into the election, then people are going to be raising questions, just like they do about me. That's what happens when you get into the arena. But I'm not asking, and I don't approve of anybody who is supporting me or say they support me to be focusing on anyone other than the Republicans.
So, and she said that there would be questions raised about Joe Biden if he gets in. What exactly are they preparing for?
Well, the campaign itself says that they are not preparing at all. The opposition research, which she's trying to disavow there, is being done by an outside super PAC group supporting her. But behind the scenes, of course, they're preparing. And of course, they're thinking about it. Joe Biden has a very, very long record, longer even than Hillary Clinton's. There's a lot to look at. Certainly, his time as vice president will offer some possibility for some comparison, certainly on the Trans-Pacific trade partnership that we discussed during the broadcast. That'll be a big one for her. But, you know, she and he had quite a lot of foreign policy debates during the first term, principally over Afghanistan, and then also to a degree over Syria. So certainly those would come up. They have many of the same domestic policies, but there will definitely be places where she will, if he does get in, where she will try to distinguish herself against him, and he'll probably look even more sort of mainstream centrist Democrat than she does by comparison to the rest of the field, which is pretty far left.
Now, Reid, the president was in Roseburg, Oregon this week, today, in fact, following up on the tragedy that was there a few days ago. You wrote a story about some gun control measures. You know, everybody's taken it as a given. Mm-hmm. Well, no, we can't. Nothing can pass in the Congress, and the president's even signaled as much. What did you find about the level of public support if they were to try?
So we conducted a survey of 2,000 registered voters across the country, and we found that a clear majority of Americans, 55%, favor the concept of stricter gun control laws. But when you get really narrow into the actual possible gun control measures that people could pass, support is much higher, whether it's a ban on assault weapons.
That's fascinating. I thought you were going to say it was high in general, and then when you got to the specific, it was lower.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite. There is, you know, huge support for banning assault weapons, huge support for banning high-capacity ammunition magazines, huge support for a national database that would track every sale, and huge support for background checks on everything, including private sales, which don't exist now. When I say huge support, I mean 70, 75, 80% of Americans, in some cases, 75% of Republican voters say that they back some of these measures.
More of a consensus, so we get almost anything.
It is. It is. Broadly speaking, gun control is a very popular issue, especially when you get into the specifics. And I think you've seen the conversation change on gun control. We're hearing from the Republicans this week after the tragedy in Roseburg a lot of the same things that Republicans have been saying for 10, 20, 30 years when one of these things happen. Let's not politicize it. Let's talk about mental health and things like that. And President Obama has said, no, we're going to politicize it. We're going to make it a political issue. Hillary Clinton has, if Hillary Clinton has embraced something on the campaign trail, you know that the polling is in her favor. The other Democrats were quick to jump on the gun control bandwagon. Or lead the bandwagon in some cases. Interestingly, one person who is not as in favor of gun control as the rest of the field is Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont, who is otherwise far to the left.
Very good NRA record. Yeah.
Yes. Very good NRA record. Vermont has one of the highest gun ownership rates in the country. You know, Howard Dean was on the board of the NRA. Pat Leahy, the senior senator from Vermont, has a very good record on guns. So he's not out of touch with his own state, but he is at least a little bit behind where Clinton is with the rest of the Democratic Democratic electorate. This gives her an opportunity to distance herself a little bit from somebody who's becoming pretty popular.
Interesting. Michael, we talked on the show about the shadow that Russia had cast over the president's Syria policy.
Yeah.
But you wrote a piece this week suggesting that this is not risk-free for Russia. Talk a little bit about that.
So President Obama's core message about what Vladimir Putin is doing is he's wading into a quagmire. He's going to regret it. Russia is weak and lashing out of weakness. One of the kind of sub-messages that I zoomed in on a little bit is, among other things, he has to worry about a backlash at home. Russia's Muslim population is estimated between 12 to 14%. It's larger in Moscow. There are a lot of guest workers in Moscow. And he has a long history going back to the 1990s of Islamist insurgency in the Caucasus region, which is sort of southern Russia that dips down, borders on Georgia and Azerbaijan, in a mountainous area there, where you have real radical activity. In fact, the Boston Marathon bombers once lived there. Tamerlan Tsarnaev went there before he came back. So it's a rough neighborhood. And what I just zoomed in on this and had some U.S. intelligence officials and terrorism analysts saying to me that this is actually a real thing. It's not idle talk from the president. You're already seeing elevated talk on social media amongst these radical groups that Russia is an enemy, that Putin is an enemy. You could start to see this effort to recruit lone wolves inside of Russia like we've seen inside of the U.S. After we began bombing in Syria. So that's a potential real concern, although one little twist to it is that Putin has, in many ways, benefited from his own war on terror. He's quite ruthless about it. They do not have a vibrant ACLU branch in Russia, and terror attacks and his ability to respond and say he's stamping out enemies of the state at a time of high Russian nationalism that he's been whipping up, according to some analysts I talked to, actually could help cement his grip on power in Russia. So it's a complicated question.
When's the last time there was a big terrorist attack against Russia on Russian soil?
So the last one that I'm aware of, and I don't think there's been a major one since then, was just before the Sochi Olympics, and people will remember that there was a real shadow over those Olympics. They created this ring of steel. There were twin, I believe, female suicide bombers. At least one of them was at a train station, and I want to say, I'm going to get the name of the city wrong, but a southern city. You had dozens killed. Really a major event. But if you go back, I mean, there was the Beslan school massacre. There was the Moscow theater siege. We kind of forget these episodes. Hundreds of people dead. Ghastly events.
Many which had origins in the Caucasus.
And with origins in the Caucasus and Chechnya, that's a whole other story we don't have time for now. But it's a very real issue, and I think people in Washington, of course, no one wishes for a terrible terrorist attack, but there's a degree you sense of them. If it does happen, there will be a little bit of, we told you so, Vladimir, welcome to our world.
Joan, now one of the first cases out of the box for the Supreme Court has to do with the death penalty. Now, we know that there was a period of time when the court outlawed the death penalty and then reinstated it. What's left for them to decide?
Well, you're talking about in 1976 when the justices reinstated it and said, but you have to have certain safeguards. Well, last term, in a very divisive moment among the justices, by a 5-4 vote, they upheld lethal injection in Oklahoma as it was carried out with this kind of 3-drug protocol. The question went to the method. But Justice Stephen Breyer, joined by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, used the occasion to say, it's time to rethink capital punishment overall. Let's go back to that period where the court was in the 70s when, in 72, it struck it down as unconstitutional without certain safeguards. Now, it was only Justice Breyer and Justice Ginsburg saying it last June, very last day of the term. But the fact that they'd even proposed that got both sides very ginned up. And it was in a case that what turned out to be the most anger-ridden during oral arguments, and then the most angry moment at the very end of the term. 4 different justices read statements from the bench supporting the death penalty and against the death penalty in this Oklahoma case. So now we're back. Everybody's, you think the tensions have subsided, but they haven't in some ways. And it was a Kansas case involving these 2 brothers who had gone on this horrific killing spree, ended up killing 4 people, but after a lot of really gruesome, awful crimes that even had the justices this week saying, we see a lot of death penalty cases, and in the words of Justice Samuel Alito, this is really one of the most horrific. So this case doesn't test the death penalty per se, John, in terms of is it constitutional or not. It tests, the instructions that are given to jurors. It tests whether these 2 brothers should have been, their sentencing phase should have been combined as it was rather than severed. But you could still feel the tensions in the backdrop. And at one point, Justice Antonin Scalia said to one of the lawyers from Kansas, it appears that Kansans, who have at least about, 9, 10 people on their death row, they support the death penalty, unlike Justice Breyer here, who doesn't. So that was the one way it emerged, but it was basically on this narrow issue. So I think what we're going to probably see a case that will come down the pike that will actually give the justices a chance to revisit the Eighth Amendment question. But I have to say, as loud and as Stephen Breyer was on the last day of the term and as much attention as it got, you still need 5 votes to reverse.
But public opinion's interesting on this, just as it is on guns, as Reid was saying. Over time, as you know, the opposition to capital punishment, it's not a majority, but it's been creeping up.
Yes, and here's the other thing that's happened over time is that executions have gone down. A lot of municipalities, prosecutors, and law enforcement just think in many cases it's not worth it. It costs so much more to go through those kinds of prosecutions. A lot of people just don't have the appetite for it. Go ahead and put somebody behind bars for life. That might they do too.
Thanks, everybody. Stay online. Let us know what you're thinking about this campaign. Upload your videos. Share your opinions at 16 for 2016. That's at pbs.org/Washington Week. I'm John Harwood. Gwen will be back next week for another edition of the Washington Week Webcast Extra.